Ooh, it's spooky. Yeah, there's a reason for that. It's because it's Halloween time, man. And if it's Halloween time, that means it's time to watch some monster movies. So I figured I'd do some watch-alongs of some monster movies. I thought that would be fun. So if you're here to join me, thank you for joining me. I hope you're going to enjoy this. If you've never watched anything along with me before in my watch-alongs, this is how it works: is you get whatever it is I'm watching, you put it up on your TV, you keep me on your phone, and we watch the thing together. And I'll weigh in and give my thoughts and maybe crack a couple of jokes or something. But today we're gonna watch Dracula, so should be fun. Ooh, that one looks really spooky. It's got to look spooky because we're watching a horror movie. So I'm kind of experimenting around with this lamp. I want to get it to look just spooky enough, you know. Let's see if we can do something with it. Ooh, it's spooky. Ooh, we're gonna watch a horror movie. So this is Dracula from 1931, starring Bela Lugosi. It's gonna be nice and creepy. Well, maybe it's not so creepy to us nowadays because we're used to just watching stuff that's a lot scarier. And but it's still really cool. It's still a movie I enjoy. It's still the movie that started it all. Where did I put my remote control? I can't see in here because it's dark and it's spooky. So let me have a little more light so that way I can find where I put my remote control. So yeah, this is a movie that I've been fascinated with for a very long time, since I was a small child, in fact. And like I think that the classic monsters, your Frankenstein's and your Draculas, and your Wolfman, the Mummy, all those guys, they're guys who were kind of ingrained into the popular culture, like very much even when I was a kid, and you'd see them on cartoons and things like that. It was fairly regular. Like if you watched, Scooby Doo or Super Friends or something like that, there was almost always an episode where they dealt with Dracula or Frankenstein or whoever, mummies, werewolves, and it all started here in 1931 with Bela Lugosi in the role. Now, Bela Lugosi is my absolute favorite Dracula. There's no question about it. There's been lots of great actors who have played Dracula since. Don't get me wrong, but even if he's not your absolute favorite, chances are good that if you were to close your eyes and just picture the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the word Dracula, and you're thinking of Eastern European guy with his hair slicked back, white tie and tails, and an opera coat. Good evening. You're thinking of that guy. That's Dracula right there. That's become the definitive version of the character. So let's go ahead and get started. And this music is Swan Lake. Now, for the longest time, anytime like in every version of this, whether I had it on the official VHS or recorded off a television, there was like a little blip in the soundtrack right there. And they've since fixed it. It's not there anymore. But I think whatever their master copy of it was kind of messed up for whatever reason. Count Dracula, Bela Lugosi, Mina Helen Chandler, John Harker, David Manners, Renfield, Dwight Fry, Van Helsing, Edward Van Sloan, Dr. Seward, Herbert Funston, Lucy is Frances Dade, the maid is Joan Standing, and Martin, my favorite character, is Charles Gerard. Well, he's not my favorite character, but he's my favorite supporting character. Martin's hilarious. Come along, old fly eater. Gorgeous matte painting there. And this lady that's about to be the first lady to speak in this movie, that's Carla Lumley. She was, I believe, the niece of Carl Lumley, the owner of Universal Studios. The way she covers up his mouth. She don't even want him to say the word. Still experimenting with this light. We can't have too much light. It's gotta be spooky. But you probably still want to see since it's a video. Maybe if I move the camera over here. Well, I can't move too far because of the cord, can I? Spooky. Tilt it up a little bit like that. Oh yeah, now we're spooky. So our hero, at least for the first part of this movie, Dwight Fry as Renfield. Now, anybody who's read the book knows that this part in the book is filled by Jonathan Parker. But instead, they decided to have Renfield in here as kind of an origin as to how he goes nuts. So, yeah. I love this innkeeper, too. He's great. And she actually does the cross thing. I love the look on the innkeeper's face. He's awesome. To the castle. I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. Huh. So Dwight Fry, like before this movie, I think he was more known for sort of like light comedy and maybe had designs on being a leading man. But after this movie, he always got cast as like these kind of like weird, sort of just unstable kind of characters. And he's a great character actor. And, you know, people like me who are fans of like the old school monster movies, they'll tell you what a great actor Dwight Fry is, but he probably didn't deserve to be typecast like that. I think if he was capable of doing a role like this, he could do anything. I like the big cross in the background. Gorgeous matte painting of the castle. Another gorgeous matte painting of the castle. And this is a really cool shot here. This is Carl Freund was the cinematographer. So anytime you see a cool shot like this, it's Carl Freund, man. He did that kind of stuff. Now the thing that he would also become well known for, besides cinematography in movies like this, and as an opossum, and he did Metropolis with Fritz Lang. He was from Germany. Like the little teeny tiny coffin for the insect. But yeah, later on, he would be the guy who would design the 3 camera setup for I Love Lucy. So he was kind of responsible for the way a sitcom looks. And then we have Dracula and his brides, and like right off the bat, like you see the intensity in Lugosi's eyes, and he's good at projecting this air of something not human. Like there's something not quite human about him. Like you'll see when he talks with other people, he can be quite charming, but when he's by himself, it's just that's where you have this sort of otherworldly quality about him. So this poor coachman having to drive Renfield up here. This is just tosses the bag off. It's like I'm not hanging around these freaking vampires, man. Dracula disguised as the coachman. That's something from the book. They don't really get too much into it in the movie, but in the book, there's this idea that like Dracula doesn't have any servants, so he has to do all the work himself. You know, seeing to the needs of Jonathan Harker, making sure like his bed's made and his dishes are washed and everything like that, preparing all the meals. Is kind of crazy. It's weird that they didn't cover Lugosi's face at all. So I don't know how I don't know how Renfield doesn't recognize him as Dracula when he gets back up to the castle. Or maybe he does and he's just too polite to say anything. There was a later edition of this where they had Philip Glass compose a score for it, and it's a really good score. I enjoy watching that version sometimes, but I tend to default back to the original version. And now Dracula is in his bat form and he's driving the horses. That's so cool. But yeah, it is a good score, though. I am glad that Universal still makes the original version available and tends to consider that the default version. I like that a lot better than, say, like George Lucas with his Star Wars special editions and trying to bury the original ones forever. It's a part of history. Like it should still be available. Renfield being all trepidatious. Guess their superstition wasn't so ridiculous in the first place, was it? Hey, Renfield. Oh man, that is gorgeous. That's a matte painting. Oh, it looks so cool. And the staircase, and see the big spider web at the top. That's going to be important in a minute. The bats all flapping around outside. Like this place is just a ruin that he's been living in for like hundreds of years. And there's an armadillo for some reason. I don't know how like an indigenous creature to the state of Texas got all the way to Transylvania, but there it is. Probably just they wanted some kind of exotic animal that would lend like more creepiness to the surroundings. Ah, yeah, you are. I don't know what happened to the dry bone. I love it. And with all this, I thought I was in the wrong country. I did you. You see him walking towards the spider web. And this is the most famous line. Well, one of the most famous lines. She was the man. Author David J. Schall, who writes a lot about the history of the character and the novels and the movies. Watch with the spider web. So they cut away from it, but he just walks right through the spider web. They don't show it because they didn't really have the technology to do that in 1931. But he walks through the spider web without even disturbing it because he can turn into a mist. And Renfield, it's like he wants Renfield to, well, what are you waiting on? So he just kind of knocks it out of the way with his cane. But David J. Scull, that's kind of one of his pet peeves as far as that line goes. Is people add to it. The blood is the life, Mr. Enfield. People add to the line like, what sweet music they make or what sad music they make, and he likes that ambiguity that the original line. It doesn't really make any judgments on the quality or the emotion. He just says what music they make. He just observes they're making music. So Dracula actually bothered to clean this area up. Brought up by whom? And again, this is all stuff that like really the servant should be doing, but he doesn't have a servant. And you might ask, why doesn't he have the brides fill the role of like a maid or something like that? And obviously, it's because he doesn't trust the brides around this, handsome young fella. Probably afraid they'd instantly drain him dry. Nobody knows I'm here at all. Lugosi's Dracula is not very much like the character from the book, and I think that's fine. I think that they made the character first into a character that worked on the stage, and then a character that worked in the movies. Look how long his fingernails are. That's from the book. And that cool ring. Later on, somebody would give that same ring to Christopher Lee, so he could wear it when he played Dracula. Pretty cool, huh? The way that he hangs on certain words, it just kind of lends to that sort of unearthly quality that Count Dracula has. Uh-oh. The way the camera zooms in on him there. And he's just drawn to it. Dracula's hungry. He's like bled this country dry pretty much. That's why he's going to England in the first place. And of course, the cross scares him away. And then when he sees Renfield suckling on the wound, he's like, oh, yeah. Notice there are two glasses there. Well, not really glasses, like goblets. And that's the other most famous line that he has. There's the great joke in Ed Wood where the little bit where they're at the club and Criswell's like, Bella, will you have some wine? And he's like, no, I never drink wine. Like, he's like, yeah, I know what you want me to say. Here you go. I love Martin Landau when he played Bela in Ed Wood. He was fantastic. That was one where apparently Bela Jr., when he first read the script, he was really irritated with that movie because it had like Bela cursing a lot. He's like, my father was like a perfect gentleman. He never talked like that. He never had such a filthy mouth. And they're like, no, 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 that's the joke. It's like it's supposed to be funny because you would never expect Bela Lugosi to talk like that. And then he's like, oh, okay, that's fine. And then he was totally cool with it. And then we see the brides and Dracula in his bat form. I'm sure that's Dracula. He just had too much. Do you think Dracula drugged the wine? I don't think he would have really needed to. And this is a very abbreviated version of what we see in the book. Very toned down in the book. It's very sexualized. And Dracula has the famous line from the book of, this man belongs to me. Some people have pointed out like kind of a homoerotic subtext to the whole Dracula Renfield bit at the beginning here. And it's implied that Dracula is going to bite him, although we don't see it. He cuts away. Aboard the Vesta, bound for England. I don't know why they changed the name of the ship, because in the book it's called the Demeter. And now we see Renfield has become a complete raving madman and filling his part as Dracula's servant. Now, in the book, when we first meet Dracula, he's like a very old man with white hair and a long white mustache. And I do believe he's feeding off Parker in the book, because we see before he even leaves for England, his hair has gone from being white to iron gray. And then finally, when he's in England and he's got basically an all-you-can-eat buffet of Britons, his hair has gone to solid black. Dracula in the book is never supposed to be an attractive character. He's always described as ugly, even when he becomes youthful again. He never becomes particularly handsome. And the silent film Nosferatu was a bit more accurate in that regard. Again, Bela's a good-looking dude, so Dracula's just going to be a handsome, charming fella. All that scene with the ship at sea was taken from an old silent movie. It still looks kind of undercranked. Because they actually filmed silent movies at a different frame rate from sound movies. So he puts the lock on the coffin, so nobody suspects there's somebody inside. I think it's interesting how they shoot this kind of almost in like a first person perspective. We don't see the people investigating the ship, we just see what they're seeing. But I think Dracula pretty much just like, killed everybody on board and drank their blood. Crew of corpses found on derelict vessel. Schooner Vesta drifts into Whitby Harbor after storm. Sole survivor, a raving lunatic, his craving to devour ants, flies, and other small living things to obtain their blood puzzles scientists. At present, he is under observation at Dr. Seward's sanitarium near London. I don't know if they're too specific about it here. London, But in the book, Dracula, or sorry, Renfield starts out as being a guy who eats flies and then moves up to eating spiders. I think they address that a little bit in here. But then, like, eventually he wanted a kitten so that he could, start feeding the spiders to the kittens. And like he was, obviously going to eat the kitten. He was working his way up the food chain, basically. And this young lady is Dracula's first victim in London. I don't know what happened to her if she became a vampire. Kind of Jack the Ripper-esque. You can tell if you look at a lot of the fashions that this is supposed to take place in like the 1930s, like the lady that just walked past Dracula in that shot, and this lady here. They're dressed in these kind of 1930s fashions. This isn't a Victorian story like the original novel was. So this is kind of a modernized take. But I don't think it really changes too much as far as like the story goes. There's too many other liberties that are taken with the story. Honestly, moving it to the 1930s is probably the least of the transgressions as far as that goes. As with any adaptation from one media to another, you gotta kind of try to figure out what works in a movie versus a novel. And of course, this version of Dracula isn't based straight off of the novel. It's based off of the stage play, which was a drawing room mystery, which is a very popular type of stage play at the time. Now, this one does kind of expand on it by, like, having set pieces in, Transylvania, and moving this scene here where they first meet to the opera. Great shot there. Bela's just such a good-looking guy with this like really intense presence, and that's why I think he works as Dracula, is because he's got this sort of like charisma about him that like he really does have kind of like a hypnotic presence. Now, I don't like the way this shot is blocked because it makes him look short. You don't want Dracula to be like towered over by Dr. Seward. Dracula should be much more physically imposing than that. I think this is why people oftentimes think Bela is shorter than he actually is, because of that shot right there. Dude was actually like, what, 6'4"? He was tall. Helen Chandler as Mina, and Lucy, and David Manners as John Harker. Not Jonathan Harker. Not sure why they changed his first name from Jonathan to John. It's not even like that different. And we remember what that castle looked like. And then you can see in the shot with him and Harker that he is a little bit taller than David Manners. David Manners is a good choice to play Harker. He's like, kind of blandly handsome. He's not gonna upstage Bela, but he's still pleasant enough that you can understand why Mina might be into him. The way the lights go dark just as he says that. That's my favorite line that Dracula has in the whole movie. There are things much worse than death. Love it. David J. Stahl again pointed out that's probably the first time that we ever heard anybody do an imitation of Bela Lugosi, and here it is in the first Bela Lugosi Dracula movie. Oh, you're gonna change your tune later. Lucy's totally into him. So I figure like Dracula's plan as far as these two women go is that he was planning on building himself another harem of vampire brides, and these two were going to be the first. Probably went after her because she was a little bit more easy access since she's living alone apparently. And of course, in the book, there's this whole he visits her night after night and slowly drains her of blood. And they call in Dr. Van Helsing initially to try to figure out what's wrong with Lucy, but the movie's a bit more condensed as far as that goes. So really, he just visits her this one time. And the little toy bat flapping in the window. It was 1931. There was so much they could do about that. I'm sure to viewers in 1931 who had never seen any kind of supernatural thriller like this, it was just horrifying enough. Just the idea that like Dracula would turn from a bat and back into Dracula again. And they didn't even have to show the transformation. Just the suggestion of it was enough. And I've always loved this shot of him hovering over her like that. And then all of a sudden, she's in an operating theater. And they say another death. So, like, she's called Lucy Weston in this. Again, I'm not sure why they changed her names. It's like similar enough to Weston Rock. It just seems kind of on the throat of each victim, the same two marks. But it just seems kind of arbitrary how they changed some of these names. So the Seward Sanitarium sign, I kind of wonder if like maybe that was an influence on Batman the animated series and the gateway of Arkham Asylum, because it is similar with the arc with the name on it. This guy's great. So he just kind of shrieks that line. Some that good Carl Freund camera work I'm talking about. He's gonna throw out the spider. There's Martin. I love Martin. Oh, Martin. He's just got that great Cockney accent. Dick Van Dyke probably studied that guy when he was getting ready for Mary Poppins. When I can have big fat spiders. And there's Dr. Van Helsing. I like the look that they came up with for Van Helsing in this, with those thick glasses and that kind of like flat top haircut. They were able to give him like a unique look of, just as much as Bela's Dracula has a unique look. Now, my personal favorite version of Van Helsing is Peter Cushing. But Peter Cushing's like my favorite actor of all time anyway. So of course I'm gonna love Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. But Edward Van Sloan is excellent as well. And he definitely set the standard for what Cushing would do later on when he played the role. Peter Cushing's Van Helsing was a little bit more of an action hero and got to do more physical stuff. But Van Helsing is very much at his core that that kind of scientist hero. That this is the kind of character that would become the hero in a lot of science fiction movies in the 50s and 60s, like This Island Earth or War of the Worlds. That kind of scientific hero, the kind of hero that in the comic books, fans of the Fantastic Four would associate with Reed Richards. I kind of feel like Van Helsing was kind of the prototype for that. Where does he go? Cushing and Lee had such great cast. Yes, they did, and they were like best friends in real life. Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. So yeah, that I'm sure that contributed to it. Oh, and here we go with Renfield pretending to be normal for a little bit, at least as long as he can. No, Renfield. A rare moment of lucidity. He's begging to be sent away because he knows that Dracula is going to use him to get at Mina. That's something that doesn't really get addressed too much in this movie, but a vampire cannot enter a dwelling unless he's invited. And in the book, that's how Dracula is able to come and go in the asylum whenever he wants, because Renfield invited him in. So, yeah. Of course, in this version, Dracula's already been invited to stop by Seward's place anyway. It's nice of the camera to pan away from the coffin so that, we don't have to see Bela clambering out of it. I guess they couldn't figure out a way to make that look cool, so they just do it that way. Likes the wolves. He's crazy. Well, thanks for telling us that, Martin. I had no idea the inmate of a lunatic asylum was crazy. Okay. There's kind of a smugness to Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing. I like that. Now, Renfield. Yeah. I warn you, Dr. Stewart. If you don't send me away, you must answer for what happened to Miss Mina. All right. Come along, Fly-Eater. Wolfsbane. I think Wolfsbane is also used in these movies often to repel werewolves, which makes sense because it's Wolfsbane. But oftentimes in the old folklore, vampires and werewolves kind of are used interchangeably, since, vampires can turn into wolves. He's not so crazy as you think. The wolves actually are talking to him. Or at least one specific wolf is. And there he is. I like how sometimes Dracula just doesn't speak in this movie, and it's almost like he's just projecting his thoughts at other people. Like, obviously Dracula is communicating something to Renfield, but we're just not privy to it. But again, it adds to that otherworldly quality that Bela has in this movie. And they never show the physical transformation of Dracula into a bat. But like I said, I don't think they had to. That's a great shot. And there is the piece of cardboard that somebody forgot to remove from when they were blocking out the light. But it's still there. Man, it's hard to think this movie's almost 100 years old now. And so much of it is just implied. But of course, back then, the implication of it would be enough to creep out your 1931 audience. This movie premiered on Valentine's Day. Yeah. They were definitely going for that more erotic kind of feel. There's a lot of breaking of the show don't tell rule in here. I kind of blame a lot of that on the fact that it's based on the stage play. And you would describe a lot of the stuff like this in a stage play. In his book, The Monster Show, David J. Schall did interview David Manners, who was still alive at the time. And Manners had indicated that he'd never even seen this movie and wasn't interested in watching it. Even saying to Schall during the interview, "No, I know what you're going to ask me, and I don't want to see a video cassette." They don't show the marks, but they describe them. And the way that they're described is very much as they're described in the novel. White with red centers. The implication being that whenever Dracula would bite his victim, he would bite them in the same exact spot, so the wounds would become kind of ragged. They were white because they were particularly bloodless there. Oh, the maid already solved the mystery. Good to see you back. And see, now we see them standing next to each other, and they're basically the same height. See, she's into him now. It's that whole vampire thing. But I think Miss Nina should go to her room at once. I love this line that Bela hears here. Most distinguished son, whose name we know, even the wine. Of course, Count Dracula, the king of vampires, would be very familiar with the world's most preeminent vampire hunter.
My humble effort to amuse your fiancée. I was telling her some rather grim tales of my father.
Imagine Mr. Steal Your Girl over here. Notice the mirror in the lid of the cigarette case. Van Helsing certainly noticed it.
I'm afraid I'm scared. My dear, I'm sure I can't dress her and excuse you. You must go to your room.
Vampires cast no reflection. I like her outfit here. It's a cute outfit. I like the way he stands as she leaves, and very old world, courtly sort of manners.
I'm sorry. My visit was so good. Not at all. Comfort. It may prove to be most enlightening.
Hmm.
In fact, before you do, you can be objective itself.
So notice he's got a monocle hanging around his neck. That's what that is. Although I don't believe Dracula ever uses the monocle in the movie. But the Count on Sesame Street had a monocle, so.
My own judgment.
He slaps the thing out of his hand. In the Spanish version, I believe he actually like knocks it out of his hand with a cane. A little more dramatic. Yeah, you can see the monocle there. Hmm. They are foul bubbles of men's vanity. That's what he says in the book when he throws Jonathan Harker's mirror out the window. Another great line there. You know, if we consider the idea that Count Dracula is actually Vlad Tepes, the warlord of the 1400s, you've got to imagine that Dracula has almost sort of like this feeling of meeting a worthy adversary when he realizes he's going to be crossing swords with Van Helsing.
He was afraid he might fall. Sometimes they take the form of you, but generally come back. What are you talking about? Dracula. But what's Dracula got to do with more than that? Dracula is now vampire. Surely, Professor, vampire has no restriction in the past. That is why Dracula smashed the mirror. I don't mean to be rude, but that's the sort of thing I expect one of these patients here to say. Yes, and that is what your English doctors would say.
Your beliefs.
Strength of the vampire is that people will not believe you.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. And where's Mina wandering off to? Oh, there's Dracula. The way he wraps the cape around her. Ah, great shot.
A vampire, Mr. Harper, is a being that gives off its escape by drinking the blood of the living. It must have blood of the dying. Its power lasts only from sunset to sunrise. During the hours of the day, it must rest in the earth in which it was buried. But then, if Dracula was a man, he'd have to return every night to Transylvania. That's impossible. Then he must have brought his native soil with him.
Dracula found a loophole. Renfield just seems to be able to come and go from his cell as he pleases.
You hear what they were saying?
And this, I believe, is another artifact from the stage play. They kind of had to do that with Renfield in the stage play because that was their way of getting him into the action. They couldn't just leave him in the cell the whole time. Whereas in the book or in most movies, they usually wind up leaving him in the cell the whole time, and it works just fine. But like I said, this is more based on the stage play than it is the book. It's kind of more like they made a movie of the stage play and brought in some of the stuff from the book that they really liked, like the Transylvania sequence, or having both Mina and Lucy in there. Dr. Seward, of course, is aged up and turned into Mina's father, whereas in the original book, he was one of Lucy's suitors. No Quincy Morris, no Arthur Holmwood. Dwight Fry is just so good. Even as good as he is at this type of acting, it's a shame that he got kind of pigeonholed into playing this type of character. As good as he is at it. Oh, what a great shot. And her reaction is just gold. And the way he crawls over towards her, it implies he's going to bite her. I'm not sure if he actually does, because we see her later on in the movie. There was a deleted shot where, like, it turned out he was just going after a fly that was buzzing around her and kind of snatches that out of the air, but they decided to have some ambiguity to it instead. He was still just hanging around there. And this is a particularly horrific element from the book that, again, it's just kind of hinted at in the movie. Lucy as a vampire. The Blue Fur Lady.
Each child describing a beautiful alien life who promised their daughter in time that makes included off and there
it's slightly on the threat.
And then, well, how could she know anything about the woman's life?
It's kind of one of those things where like they took the very idea of motherhood and perverted it. Lucy becoming a creature that preys on children.
She came out the shadow, stood looking at me. I started to speak to her. And then I remembered she was in.
Now, the first time I saw this movie was one that my stepfather had recorded for me off of television. He'd seen that it was coming on really early in the morning, and he knew that I loved these old monster movies, so he recorded this for me. And for whatever reason, a big chunk of this movie was edited out. I don't know if it was for time constraints to get it to fit into that slot, or maybe some kind of like censorship of some kind. But the entire bit with Lucy being a vampire and going after the small children, that was cut out. So I never saw this until many years later when I finally bought a VHS cassette of it, the official release VHS cassette. That would have been the one with the they all had that same trade dress. You know, the ones I'm talking about that would have come out like sometime in like the early 1990s, I think. Probably the first time a lot of us owned Dracula on a purchased VHS cassette. It wasn't the first one to put out, but I'm pretty sure the first one they put out was one that was just for rentals.
I love you.
Mm.
Just call. You will. You will come.
Mm.
It was a great professor. You're driving up ahead, Mr. Harper. That is what we should be worrying about. The last ways of these houses will be gone, and another light will be upon. Officer, I think you mean I would be to London tonight. I'll call in the police. John, in a case at your bed, you are. I must not forget or I can do nothing. Right? Both you and your bedroom have been prepared to do this. You will be safe.
So in the novel, they use garlic flowers. I'm not sure why they changed it to wolfsbane for the movie. Maybe they just want something that was a little more exotic. I don't know.
Nina is to wear this piece of wolfsbane when she goes to bed. Watch her closely and see that she does not remove it. And under no circumstances must these windows be open.
And the sun sets. And Dracula once again rises from his coffin. Or his box of earth. Whatever you want to call it. And again, the camera pans away, so we'll see him clambering out of a box full of dirt. You can see how Dracula would have been a bit of an inspiration for Batman in the way that he moves.
And knowing that the vampire was pressed by me in his naked choice, I am convinced that
That's an interesting vest that Harker's wearing there. It looks pretty similar to the one that Wesley Dodds would wear in his Sandman costume in the Sandman Mystery Theater comics. Kind of double-breasted vest kind of thing.
John, I know this. But don't forget your side off, and I must do what I think is best. I have devoted my lifetime to the study of many strange things. Little known facts which the world is perhaps better off from not knowing. I know.
You notice the way that Van Helsing sits on the table, and that puts him in a somewhat higher position than Harker's at, making him the dominant figure in the shot. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier with the Dracula, the opera box. They should have found a way to make Dracula taller than Dr. Seward instead of the other way around for that very reason. Renfield's at least lucid enough to be able to quote Shakespeare, isn't he? More show don't tell, being inverted, DNA from the stage play. I'm making them happen. He's great. You know, I think it's okay to tell and not show when it's being told as well as Dwight Fry is telling it right here. That was what I was missing. He went from flies to spiders to rats to want to get kitten. Rats. Thousands of them. Millions of them. Dwight Fry would have been a great Joker, I think, if they'd have made a Batman movie in the 1930s. If the Joker was a character that existed in the 1930s, of course. He first appeared in 1940. I kind of wonder if maybe Dwight Fry's performance was a bit of an influence, now that I think about it, on the performance of Frank Gorshin as the Riddler. He has a lot of those same mannerisms and his facial expressions, like the big manic grin, very similar in a lot of ways. Ah, this is probably my favorite scene in the movie. The confrontation between Count Dracula and Van Helsing.
And protect those who you would destroy. You are right. I love now call for the rain. You will live through the centuries to come. You must keep us Dracula.
You know, of course, Edward Van Sloan played the part of Van Helsing on the stage, opposite Lugosi as Dracula, many times. So this is old hat for both of these gentlemen at this point. Probably explains why they both do it so well. A stake through your heart. And if you're somebody like me who's seen this movie like hundreds of times, you pick up on a lot of these subtle things. Love the way he does his hand here. Yeah. You must be double jointed, and you must be Hungarian. Van Helsing, even with the strong will that Van Helsing has, he's still compelled forward, but he's able to fight it off. It's like these guys were like intended, like by fate, to, you know, even over the course of like hundreds of years between the birth of Vlad Tepes and the birth of Abraham Van Helsing, like these guys were just always meant to be arch enemies. Indeed. And it's a crucifix. Now, in the play, and they do this also in the Frank Langella film, it's not a crucifix. It's actually a host, like one of the crackers that's used in a communion ceremony. Which, of course, in the Catholic faith, you believe that the body of Christ is actually physically present in those communion wafers. So Dracula has this intense reaction and even accuses Van Helsing of sacrilege. But I guess maybe they figured that might be a little too controversial for this movie in 1931.
You're so like a changed girl. You look funny.
See, even like Harker is into that whole vampire thing. It's he's never seen her like this before, and he's so excited. And what's different about her? She's turning into a vampire. Vampires are sexy. They don't fucking sparkle.
Millions of them. I've never seen them so
And the way she looks at his throat with that intensity.
Reach out and touch. You might need to get your head.
Oh, way to break the mood there.
What's the matter?
Oh, nothing. Nothing at all.
And she knows something's up. She is pretty sexy in that dress. And the way it hugs her curves.
Here from the beginning that happened. Dracula boasts that he has used his blood that he likes to now become a powerful in the night. But then here from him comes the power of woman God.
I don't like
Oh, yes, you said you were afraid of her.
but now I have everything. I'm so sorry.
I've got the boogie on the disco round. Dracula's like, she's mine now, bitch. Stay away from her. And again, the bat's communicating with her. We can't hear what Dracula is saying, but she can hear it in her mind.
You said I did.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Mina has gotten like really good at gaslighting since she got bitten by the vampire.
And he's only one. Why?
Oh, you're going to protect me again. When did I count back to the whatever it is?
I don't know. You may be right.
You gotta have that crucifix ready. Ah, that intense look on her face.
You're right. They look at me so strangely.
She actually looks a lot like somebody who's a friend of mine. One of the nicest people I ever knew.
Tina, you're so
Well, she's gonna try to attack him now. How dare you scare her with a crucifix? Now, in the book, this is kind of like the equivalent of the scene in the book, although it's like way toned down from the book, where they find they burst into Mina's room and find her with Dracula, his shirt open, cut himself on the chest, and he's forcing her to drink his blood. And again, they tell and don't show, and even then they tone it down so he opens a vein in his arm, not actually having her suckle at his breast. Another perversion of motherhood, if you think about it that way. But yeah, and then Van Helsing actually touches the communion wafer to her forehead, and it leaves a red mark that stays on her forehead in the novel until they actually manage to kill Dracula, and then it fades away. Thus, I missed my favorite line. So see, she's fine. She didn't get bit on the neck. But I love how he's like, they're all crazy except you and me. And sometimes I have me doubts about you. And she's like, yes. He's like, yeah, never mind. Backs away from her slowly. And she pulls the wolf bane off. and the maid is hypnotized. And you notice he doesn't try to drink the maid's blood, even though I'm sure her blood is perfectly fine. But yeah, Dracula is a little bit of a snob, I guess. The servants are beneath him. And what's she doing? You might want to look into that a little further there, Dr. Seward. I, I keep trying to pronounce his name correctly. The name is supposed to be pronounced Seward, but it still keeps coming out Seward. Like C Ward. That's how you're supposed to say it. But I guess it's because I have an American accent. It just keeps coming out like sewer, but with a D at the end of it. There's that piece of cardboard again. Where's Renfield going off to?
What's he doing here?
In the book, Dracula lives in an old ruined abbey, and Carfax is a different place. I think Carfax is one of the places that he owns, but he still kind of sleeps in the abbey sometimes. But in the movies, oftentimes they're combined into one place that's called Carfax Abbey. But in the book, they were two completely different locations. There was Carfax, and there was the Abbey. So now he's actually taken Mina. This is where we're going to get some more of that, where I'm talking about, where like Dracula is kind of communicating with his mind. So they're having what seems like a one-sided conversation, but we can only really hear what Renfield's saying. I would not want to have a staircase that would go up that high and not have any kind of railing on it. But it looks cool, doesn't it? This is like one of the best shots in the whole movie. Kneels before him, supplicant. God, the acting is so good here. Bela's so intense, and Dwight Fry is so manic. And then he just lifts him with one hand, and just, God, what does he do to him? We don't even see. Like, I imagine him just like crushing his rib cage and breaking his vertebra in his neck, and then he just throws him down those stairs. Slams the door right in his face. Dracula's been interrupted before he can really fully finally turn Mina into a vampire, but they're afraid they're going to find her in one of those coffins. I love this set with all the archways and everything. It really does look like Castle Dracula, doesn't it? Probably the same set, actually. 2 boxes of earth. And Dracula's in one. Where's Mina? Dracula's in one. Is Mina in the other? That's what they're thinking. David Manners is really good at conveying that there. Like, he doesn't even want to look. What's in the box? Van Helsing even can't bring himself to look.
He has stolen anything that he tries to take to their house.
Van Helsing isn't quite as well prepared as a lot of his counterparts in other movies, who usually have like a little doctor's bag where he's got his own wooden stakes and his own little hammer that he can drive it in with. And here he's just like, go find me something to knock these makeshift wooden stakes that I'm about to make from when I break these coffin lids. And then when he goes to open this one, she's not here.
Did you make your wrong? Peter! Peter! Peter!
Dracula's the more important one to kill anyway. And she's just been standing over in the corner, hypnotized. And it's like she can physically feel the stake going into Dracula's heart. And the spell is broken. They make a much bigger deal about that in the novel, how like there's this mental connection between Mina and Count Dracula, and it's actually something that they use against Dracula because they're able to track his movements on the way back to Transylvania because of his mental connection to Mina. Hoist by his own petard. And Van Helsing's like, yeah, I got some other stuff I got to deal with. You guys go along. He doesn't mention how he's going to cut off Dracula's head and burn the body. That was maybe a little much for 1931 audiences. But of course, the police show up and arrest him for murdering Count Dracula right at this spot. You know this if you've seen Dracula's daughter. That's how it ends up in that. So that was Dracula, the 1931 original, and the very first of the classic Universal Monsters movies. Yeah, I know there was, Phantom of the Opera and Hunchback of Notre Dame, but those are the silent movies. This is what really started this cycle. So I enjoyed watching it. I hope you enjoyed watching it with me, and probably do another one of these next week because we got a whole another month of October ahead of us almost. Well, at least 2/3 of it, I think. Anyway, we'll talk to you next time. Bye. Did you end?